July 7th, 1944, Marpi Point, Saipan. Nurse Keiko Yamada pulled the pin on her Type 94 grenade. In 30 seconds, she would die for the Emperor. She had been taught that was honor. But then an American soldier offered her water, and everything she believed shattered in a single moment. This is the story of how enemy soldiers became the most unlikely witnesses to American values, and why thousands of Japanese women wept not from pain, but from the devastating truth they had been lied to their entire lives. To understand why this moment broke her, you need to know what Keiko was taught to believe about Americans. For months, imperial propaganda filled every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every village square. Americans were devils incarnate. They would torture prisoners, defile women, laugh at Japanese honor. Better to die, always better to die than to fall into their hands. Keiko believed every word. So did 300,000 Okinawan civilians. So did every Japanese soldier who chose suicide over surrender. The propaganda was so complete, so overwhelming, that mothers threw their own children off cliffs rather than let Americans touch them. But here is what the propaganda got wrong. What happens when someone trained from birth to hate you discovers you are not what they were told? What happens when the beast hands you chocolate instead of a bayonet? What happens when everything you believed turns out to be a lie designed to make you die? For Keiko Yamada, for Nurse Chio Miyazaki on Okinawa, for thousands of Japanese prisoners, the answer would change their lives forever. But it would also reveal something profound about America, something the propaganda feared more than any weapon we had. In the next hour, you will discover why a single canteen of water destroyed months of propaganda. The Japanese officer who witnessed Americans saving his people and could not reconcile it with everything he had been taught. How a piece of bacon changed the Cold War, and the moment when enemy soldiers realized the real monsters wore their own uniforms. If you or your father served in the Pacific Theater, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and hit subscribe, because this is not just history. It is a lesson about what makes America exceptional that every generation needs to remember. But first, let me take you to Saipan, July 1944, where the battle for the island was supposed to be over, but the real war had just begun. 24-year-old Keiko Yamada was the daughter of a Tokyo schoolteacher who had been arrested for dangerous thoughts questioning the war. Her mother died of pneumonia in 1943, unable to afford medicine. Keiko enlisted as a military nurse to clear her family name, to prove loyalty. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, of saving lives. Instead, the Imperial Army sent her to Saipan with one mission: tend to wounded soldiers until the final Banzai charge, then die with them. On July 6th, Lieutenant Sato, her commanding officer, gathered all medical staff in a cave. He handed each nurse a Type 94 grenade. The steel was cold and heavy in her palm. The weight of it felt like destiny. Tomorrow, he said, his voice flat, empty of emotion, the American beasts will overrun this position. You know what they do to Japanese women, what they did in Manila, what they did in China. He was not lying about China. The Japanese army had committed atrocities there. Keiko knew this. So when Sato said the Americans are just like us, only worse, she believed him. Pull the pin when you see them, Sato continued. Die clean, die with honor. Your families will be proud. Keiko spent that night clutching the grenade in the suffocating darkness of the cave. Around her, other nurses wept quietly. One woman, older, a mother of 3 children back in Yokohama, whispered prayers to ancestors. Another sat in silence, her face a mask of acceptance. No one questioned the order. To question was to betray everything they had been taught since childhood. The Emperor is divine. Japan is sacred. Americans are beasts. Death before dishonor. These were not opinions. They were facts, the bedrock of reality itself. 800 feet above Keiko on the Marpy Point Plateau, Private First Class Daniel Reeves was about to face a battle he was not trained for. Danny, 22, Cleveland, Ohio, bar gunner, 2nd Marine Division. His older brother Michael died at Guadalcanal in 1942, shot through the throat, leading a charge. Danny carries Michael's last letter in his breast pocket. 3 words are underlined in his brother's careful handwriting. Don't become hate. Danny enlisted to finish what Michael started. To kill Japanese soldiers. Simple revenge. Clean mathematics. They took his brother. He would take their lives. But through his binoculars that morning, Danny saw something that made him vomit. Japanese officers pushing their own civilians off the cliff. Not soldiers. Civilians. Women holding infants. Children clutching their mothers' hands. Old men leaning on walking sticks. And the officers were not being forced. They were choosing to do this. Shouting orders. Gesturing with their rifles toward the empty air over the abyss. Shooting anyone who hesitated. Danny lowered the binoculars. His hands were shaking. The taste of bile burned in his throat. "They are killing them," he said, his voice a choked whisper. "Son of a bitch. They are murdering their own people." His squad leader, Sergeant Frank Moretti, crawled up beside him, his face streaked with grime and sweat. He took one look through his own field glasses and started cursing a long, unbroken stream of invective that would have made a longshoreman blush. The radio crackled. An order came through that changed everything. Do not fire on civilians. Repeat, do not fire on civilians. Save them if possible. Moretti stared at the radio handset like it was broken. "Save them," he muttered. "Sarge, they are jumping. How the hell do we save people from themselves?" Here is what you need to understand about July 7th, 1944. General Saito's 30,000-man garrison was already destroyed. Organized resistance had collapsed. The battle for Saipan was over. Every tactical objective had been achieved. The island was secure. But for the 20,000 Japanese civilians on the island, the battle was just beginning. Because the Imperial Army had prepared them for this moment for years. Radio broadcasts warned them daily. Village meetings reinforced the message. School lessons taught children that Americans ate human flesh, all repeating the same litany of horror. Americans are not human. They are demons in human skin. They take pleasure in suffering. They will do things to you worse than death. They will violate your women. They will torture your children. They will mock your ancestors and defile your honor. The propaganda was so effective that when the Marines approached Marpy Point, Japanese mothers willingly threw their babies off the cliff, then jumped themselves. A unified scream swallowed by the vastness of the sea below. Think about that. Think about the depth of belief required to kill your own child because you are that convinced the alternative is worse. That is not just propaganda. That is systematic psychological warfare designed to turn every Japanese citizen into a suicide weapon. And it was working. Through the shimmering heat haze, Danny could see them. Hundreds of people packed near the cliff's edge. The sound was not rifle fire. It was wailing, a chorus of human anguish that carried across the volcanic rock and invaded his skull. A Japanese officer, sword drawn, was herding a group of women and children closer to the precipice. One woman broke away, running back toward the jungle. The officer did not hesitate. He swung the sword in a clean arc. The woman fell. He kicked her body over the edge. This was not combat. This was murder dressed up as honor. Danny felt something crack inside his chest. The clean mathematics of revenge became meaningless. These were not the enemy. These were victims of the enemy. The real enemy wore Japanese uniforms and carried Japanese swords and spoke Japanese words that commanded death. Suddenly, a new sound joined the chorus of wailing, the flat, tinny rasp of a loudspeaker. Down the line, a bullhorn crackled to life. The voice that came through spoke perfect formal Japanese, amplified and strange, rolling across the plateau like thunder. The bullhorn felt heavy in Corporal Thomas Chen's hands. 20 years old, born in Los Angeles to parents who immigrated from Hiroshima in 1920. His family parents, 2 sisters, grandmother were locked in Manzanar internment camp while he fought for America. Tommy enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, not because he wanted to, because he had to prove his loyalty, to show he was American, not the enemy. But the Marines did not trust him at first. Some called him Jap behind his back. Others refused to share foxholes. One corporal from Mississippi told him straight to his face that he did not care what uniform Tommy wore, he still looked like the bastards who bombed Pearl. Tommy carried that with him. The weight of having to prove something that should never need proving. That your humanity is real. That your loyalty is genuine. That you are not responsible for the sins of people who happen to share your face. Now, holding that bullhorn, Tommy was about to do something impossible. Convince his ancestors' people that the country imprisoning his family was actually trying to save them. Watashitachi wa anata o kizutsukenai. His voice echoed across the plateau. We will not harm you. We have food. We have water for your children. We are not your enemy. Surrender and you will be treated with kindness. For a moment, the chaos paused. People froze. Heads turned. Inside her hiding place behind the volcanic rock, Keiko heard her own language. But the words made no sense. Americans do not speak Japanese. Americans do not promise kindness. This must be a trick. A demon mimicking human speech to lure them into hell. Lieutenant Sato heard it too. His face twisted with rage. He raised his voice to drown out the loudspeaker. Do not listen. It is a lie designed to trick you into dishonor. They want you to surrender so they can do worse to you. Die with honor. Die for the Emperor. Now. But something in Tommy's voice, the genuine pleading tone, the perfect formal Japanese, planted a seed of doubt. Then Keiko saw it happen. A young couple, perhaps no older than herself, maybe 20, 25 years old, broke from the crowd, started running away from the cliff, back toward the jungle, toward life, toward the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, the voice on the loudspeaker was telling the truth. Lieutenant Sato turned. His hand moved to the Nambu pistol on his hip, drew it with practiced efficiency. The crack of the small caliber weapon was sharp and clear, cutting through the wailing like a knife. The young man felt his momentum carrying him forward in an awkward tumble. The woman screamed, a sound of pure anguish that made Keiko's blood freeze. She collapsed beside her fallen lover, hands reaching for him, trying to stop the blood that poured from the hole in his back. Sato walked over. His boots crunched on the volcanic gravel. He stood over the wounded man, aimed carefully, and fired again. The man's body jerked once and went still. Then Sato turned the pistol toward the woman. She looked up at him, not with fear, with incomprehension, as if she could not understand how her own officer, her own countryman, had become the monster she was supposed to fear. Sato fired. The woman fell across her lover's body. He turned to the crowd and shouted, his voice carrying the authority of command and the madness of a true believer. Do you see? This is what happens to traitors. The Americans lie. They want you to surrender so they can do worse to you. Die with honor. Now. He raised his pistol and fired into the crowd. 3 shots. 3 people fell. Panic erupted. The orderly march to oblivion became a chaotic stampede. Some people ran toward the cliff, embracing the certainty of death over the terror of the unknown. Others scattered, trying to hide behind rocks in crevices, anywhere the madness could not reach them. Keiko Yamada's world split in 2. For months, Lieutenant Sato had been her commander, strict but protective. He praised her medical skills, told her she would make a fine doctor after the war if she survived. She had trusted him, believed in him. Now he had just murdered 2 people for wanting to live. She looked at the grenade in her hand, pin still in. The steel was slick with her sweat. The idea of pulling it, of holding it to her chest for an honorable death, now seemed like a grotesque joke. What honor is there in this slaughterhouse, orchestrated by her own leaders? The propaganda said, Americans are the monsters. But the monster was standing 30 feet away, wearing an Imperial Army uniform, reloading his pistol to kill more of his own people. Still, Keiko did not move. Because breaking propaganda is not a single moment. It is a cascade. A crack that spreads slowly through the foundation of everything you believe until the whole structure collapses. And the crack was about to become a chasm. The scene dissolved into pure chaos. Other Japanese soldiers, seeing the hesitation in the crowd, began to follow their officer's lead. They threw grenades, not at the Marines, into the thickest parts of the civilian crowd. The muffled explosions sent bodies flying, limbs separated from torsos. Blood misted the air. They used their rifles and bayonets on anyone who resisted the march to the sea. A grandmother trying to shelter her grandchildren, a father attempting to shield his family, all cut down by their own army. The Marines were now in a firefight that made no sense. They were laying down suppressive fire, but their targets were the Japanese soldiers who were attacking the Japanese civilians. They were trying to kill the shepherds to save the sheep. Danny Reeves found himself firing his bar in short, controlled bursts, aiming not at the crowds, but at the uniformed figures with rifles who were pushing them. He was providing cover for the enemy. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. He saw another Marine from a different platoon, a kid named O'Malley, break cover and run forward, waving his arms, yelling, "No, stop! Please stop!" A Japanese soldier turned and fired. O'Malley went down, clutching his leg, still reaching toward the civilians even as he fell. He died trying to save them, died protecting people who had been taught he was a demon. In the midst of the carnage, Keiko's mind went numb. The soldier who had been pulling her toward the cliff was struck by a stray round and fell away, his grip on her arm releasing. She was on her own now. The grenade was a dead weight in her hand. The pin was still in it. All she had to do was pull, hold it close, count to 5, die clean. But clean death required belief. And her belief was hemorrhaging from 1,000 cuts. She scrambled on her hands and knees away from the cliff, away from the screaming soldiers, away from the bodies tumbling through empty air. She found a small outcropping of volcanic rock and huddled behind it, making herself as small as possible. She was trapped between 2 terrors. In front of her, the American soldiers were firing. Behind her, her own countrymen were committing mass murder. The world had been turned inside out. Through a gap in the rocks, she saw a single American Marine detach from his line. He stood up, in the middle of a battlefield, started running low and fast directly toward her position. He was tall and broad-shouldered. His uniform was filthy, caked with mud and blood. The M1 Garand in his hands looked impossibly large. His face was a grimace of exertion and determination. The enemy was coming for her. Private First Class Daniel Reeves ran. He did not think. He just moved. His lungs burned. The volcanic ground tore at his boots. The air was alive with the hornet buzz of ricochets, bullets striking rock and whining off into space. He was running toward the Japanese nurse huddled behind the rock. He had seen the soldier beside her go down, seen the terror in her eyes, a terror so profound it looked like paralysis. Danny had seen the propaganda leaflets on dead Japanese soldiers, crude drawings showing Americans as horned monsters dragging away screaming women. Now he had to prove without words that those images were lies. He had 30 seconds or she would die. Sergeant Moretti's voice crackled in his memory. "Reeves, what the hell are you doing? I'm not letting them die, Sarge." He slowed as he approached the rock, deliberately lowering the muzzle of his Garand to the ground. Let it hang loose on its sling. He held up his empty left hand, palm forward, the universal gesture meaning, "I mean you no harm." 20 feet away. 15. 10. He stopped. Keiko Yamada did not breathe, did not blink. The American soldier was here, right here. Close enough that she could see the stubble on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes, the mud caked on his uniform. His eyes, they were blue. The propaganda said American eyes were red like demons, but these were blue like the sky over Tokyo in spring, and they were filled not with demonic rage or sadistic glee, but with exhaustion so deep it seemed ancient. He said something in his alien tongue. His voice was low and calm, not the growl of a monster, the voice of a man. A tired, scared man who had seen too much death and wanted it to stop. Danny unslung his canteen. His movements were slow, deliberate, exaggerated, so she could see exactly what he was doing. He unscrewed the cap with a practiced twist, extended the canteen toward her, held it out like an offering. Keiko stared at the canteen as if it were a bomb. Is this poison? Is it a trick? Is this the beginning of the humiliation she was warned about? Her throat was a desert. She had not had a real drink in 2 days. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. Behind her another scream, another splash, another life ending on the rocks 800 feet below. The Marine did not flinch. His blue eyes did not leave hers. He gave the canteen a small, encouraging shake. Water sloshed inside. The sound of it was beautiful. Then another woman, Fumiko, a schoolteacher from Yokohama, who had been hiding behind the same rock, reached out with a trembling hand. Her fingers, thin and pale, wrapped around the canteen. Danny let go without hesitation. No struggle, no demand for payment or submission. He just released it. Fumiko brought the canteen to her lips and drank, long and deep. Water spilled down her chin. She drank like a person drowning, desperate and graceless. And she did not die. She did not collapse in agony. Her face did not twist in pain. She drank, and the water was good, and she lived. Then she began to weep. A quiet, broken sound. Not the wailing of grief, the crying of someone whose entire understanding of reality has just been destroyed. That sound shattered the last wall of Keiko's conditioning. The lie was so total, so complete, that its collapse was a physical event. She felt it like a building falling inside her chest. A sob tore its way from her throat, raw and ragged. A sound of grief for the people who jumped. Terror for how close she came. Relief so overwhelming it felt like its own kind of pain. She curled into a ball, her body shaking uncontrollably, and wept. She wept for the young couple Lieutenant Sato murdered. She wept for the mothers who threw their babies off the cliff. She wept for the officer who chose death over admitting he was wrong. She wept for the lie that had almost claimed her. The lie that said this man with the blue eyes and the canteen of water was a devil. Danny Reeves knelt beside her, awkward and uncertain. He had been trained to kill, not to comfort. He reached out slowly and patted her shoulder. A gesture so simple, so human, so utterly at odds with everything she had been taught to expect. "You're safe now," he said. Even though she could not understand the words, she understood the tone. Gentle, protective, sad. All along the cliff-top, similar scenes were playing out. Marines were coaxing children down from ledges with Hershey bars and packs of gum. Corpsmen were tending to the wounds of people they had been shooting at just hours before. Men who had come to this island to destroy its defenders were now desperately trying to preserve its innocence. The battle for Saipan was ending not with a bang, but with the heartbreaking sound of weeping, the sound of minds breaking free from the iron grip of propaganda, the sound of people realizing they had been lied to, that the monsters wore familiar faces, that their supposed protectors spoke their own language, and that the enemy, the dreaded American beast, had offered them water when they were dying of thirst. This was the crack in the wall, the first fracture in the edifice of lies that would 9 months later be tested again on an even larger scale, on sacred ground, where the stakes would be even higher and the propaganda even more intense. But for now, on this blood-soaked plateau on the northern tip of Saipan, a Japanese nurse named Keiko Yamada learned the most dangerous truth the propaganda tried to hide. That Americans, for all their flaws and all their sins, were capable of choosing mercy over vengeance, humanity over hatred, truth over lies. And that single canteen of water offered freely in the middle of a battlefield would prove more powerful than any weapon either side possessed. Private First Class Bobby Walsh crawled forward through the volcanic ash and broken coral. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder where a Japanese rifle round had punched through muscle and gristle 20 minutes earlier. The pain was a dull throb that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He ignored it. Baby-faced farm kid from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 18 years old, but looking 15. Bobby had never left his county before enlisting. His mother cried for 3 days when he got his draft notice. His father, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, hugged him at the train station and whispered, "Be good," in his ear. Be good, not be brave, not kill the enemy. Be good. Bobby had carried those words with him through boot camp, through the nightmare crossing of the Pacific, through the landing at Saipan, through every moment when the world tried to convince him that being good meant being dead. Now, bleeding and exhausted, he pulled something from his pack. A Hershey bar, slightly melted from the heat. The paper wrapper was stained with sweat and grime. He had been saving it. 1 of 3 he had left, rationing them carefully because you never knew when the supply ships would make it through. He saw them huddled behind a cluster of rocks. A mother and a little girl, maybe 6 years old. The child's face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes were hollow with a kind of terror no child should ever know. Bobby moved slowly, deliberately, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. He held up the chocolate bar, waved it gently. The mother screamed, a sharp, piercing sound of pure panic. She grabbed her daughter and pulled her back, shielding the child with her own body. "Onegai, onegai, please, please." The only word Bobby recognized in the torrent of Japanese that poured from her lips. She thought he was trying to poison her child. Bobby stopped, sat back on his heels. The mother's terror was so genuine, so visceral, that it made his chest hurt. What had they been told? What lies had been pumped into their minds to create this level of fear? He looked at the chocolate bar in his hand. Then he did something that would be photographed by a combat journalist and become legendary in the 2nd Marine Division, though Bobby would never know about it. He broke off a piece of the chocolate, put it in his own mouth, chewed slowly, deliberately so they could see, made sure they watched him swallow. Then he smiled, the most genuine farm boy old W shucks smile he could manage. Then he held out the rest of the bar to the little girl. The mother watched him. Her eyes darted from his face to the chocolate to her daughter and back. She was calculating, weighing. Could this be real? Could the demon really be offering food without malice? Bobby waited, did not move, just held the chocolate bar in his outstretched hand, his smile never wavering despite the pain in his shoulder. Slowly, so slowly it seemed to take an eternity, the mother released her grip on her daughter's arm. The little girl looked up at her mother, a silent question in her eyes. The mother gave the smallest nod. The girl stepped forward. Her tiny hand reached out and took the chocolate bar. She brought it to her mouth and bit into it tentatively, as if expecting it to burn. Her eyes went wide. She had never tasted chocolate before, never tasted real sugar. Rationing in Japan had started in 1940. This child had spent her entire conscious life in a world of scarcity and deprivation. And now, in the middle of a battlefield, an enemy soldier had given her something sweet. She smiled, then she laughed. A pure, joyful, innocent child's laugh that rang out across the blood-soaked plateau like a bell announcing salvation. Her mother collapsed into sobs. Deep, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere beyond grief or fear. The sound of a dam breaking, the sound of everything you believed proving false, and the relief being almost as painful as the terror that preceded it. Keiko Yamada, still crying behind her rock, watched this scene unfold. The canteen, the chocolate, the American boy bleeding and smiling, the child laughing. And she understood with sudden crushing clarity. The propaganda had not just been wrong. It had been a deliberate lie designed to make Japanese people kill themselves so America could not capture them alive. To turn every civilian into a weapon that destroyed itself rather than be claimed by the enemy. The real enemy was not the Americans with their rifles and their tanks and their overwhelming industrial might. The real enemy was the lie that said death was preferable to life, that honor meant suicide, that the people trying to save you were the ones to fear. Word spread through the caves and crevices of Marpy Point, not through radio or orders, through seeing, through witnessing, through the evidence of eyes that could no longer deny what stood before them. An old man stood up from behind a stone wall. Mr. Tanaka, 68 years old, farmer from Charan Kanoa village. He had lived through the Meiji Restoration, through the annexation of Korea, through the earthquake that destroyed Tokyo. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had buried 3 of his children to disease and famine. He was tired, so deeply, profoundly tired. Japanese soldiers screamed at him, "Traitor, coward, dog, how dare you dishonor the emperor?" Lieutenant Sato, his uniform now splattered with the blood of his own people, raised his pistol and aimed at the old man's back. Danny Reeves saw it happen. His rifle came up faster than conscious thought. The Garan's front sight found Sato's center mass. "You shoot him, I shoot you." Sato did not speak English, but the tone transcends language. The promise of violence is universal. He understood that if he pulled that trigger, he would die a heartbeat later. Sato lowered his pistol, slowly, his face twisted with impotent rage. Mr. Tanaka kept walking, each step deliberate, his back straight despite his years. He walked toward the American lines with the dignity of a man who had made his final choice and found peace in it. Danny met him halfway, lowered his rifle, slung it over his shoulder. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Lucky strikes. He shook one out and offered it to the old man. Mr. Tanaka took it. His hands were steady. Danny struck a match, cupped it against the wind, lit the cigarette for him. The old man took a long drag, closed his eyes, savoured it. Then he opened his eyes and looked at Danny, really looked at him, seeing not a demon, not propaganda caricature, but a young man far from home who was tired of killing. He spoke in halting, broken English, words he had learned decades ago when American missionaries came to his village. "You not devil." Danny felt something catch in his throat. He shook his head. "No, sir, just tired." They stood there together, the old farmer and the young Marine, smoking in silence while the battle raged around them. A moment of perfect stillness in the center of chaos. And then others started walking forward. 5, 10, 20, 50. A trickle became a stream, became a flood. People emerged from hiding places like ghosts returning to the world of the living. Hesitant, terrified, but moving toward the possibility of survival rather than the certainty of death. Marines met them with water, with medical supplies, with words of reassurance translated by Tommy Chen through the bullhorn, his voice growing hoarse from the effort. By nightfall, 1,000 Japanese civilians had surrendered at Marpi Point, but 8,000 had already jumped. That image, the old man and the Marine smoking together, was captured by a combat photographer named Eugene Smith. It appeared in Life magazine in August 1944. The caption read, "The Face of American Mercy." It became one of the iconic photographs of the Pacific War. But Life magazine did not print what happened next. Lieutenant Sato, watching his people surrender, watching everything he believed in collapse, sat down on a rock. He placed his pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He died believing the lie, died rather than admit he had been wrong, died thinking that honor meant death and dishonor meant life, never understanding that he had the equation backwards. Many of you watching lived through this era. Maybe your fathers fought at Saipan. Maybe you remember reading about Marpi Point in the newspapers. If you have family stories from the Pacific Theater, especially about interactions with Japanese civilians, please share them in the comments. This history deserves to be remembered. Not just the battles and the strategies, but these moments. When humanity broke through hatred, when truth defeated lies, when mercy triumphed over vengeance. You would think the Imperial High Command would learn from Saipan. You would think they would realize the propaganda was backfiring, that it was costing them thousands of civilians for no military gain, that turning their own people into suicide weapons was a strategic disaster wrapped in the language of honor. You would be wrong, because 300 miles south, another island was about to become the stage for the exact same horror. Only this time, it was not a distant mandate, not some conquered territory that could be sacrificed without regret. It was the sacred homeland itself, Okinawa, April 1945. 9 months had passed since Marpi Point. Germany would surrender in May. Japan's navy was destroyed, its ships rusting on the ocean floor or scuttled in port. Its cities were burning under waves of B-29 superfortresses that flew so high the anti-aircraft guns could barely reach them. Everyone with eyes could see the war was ending, but Emperor Hirohito was not ready to surrender, and 300,000 Okinawan civilians were about to pay the price for his refusal. The propaganda on Okinawa was even more intense than Saipan, because this was not just about military defeat. This was about the violation of sacred soil, the defilement of the homeland, the destruction of everything that made Japan Japan. Radio broadcasts told Okinawans that Americans would rape every woman, murder every child, desecrate every shrine and temple. That capture meant a fate worse than any death imaginable. And because it was the homeland, because these were not transplanted colonists, but indigenous Okinawans whose families had lived on these islands for 1,000 years, the propaganda found even more fertile ground. Among the 300,000 civilians was a young mother who had already lost everything except her children. 31 years old and already a widow. Chio Miyazaki had lost everything in March except her 2 children. She was a seamstress from Naha. In March 1945, American bombers obliterated her neighborhood. She survived because she was visiting her sister in a village to the north. Her husband Takeshi did not survive. He was at the harbor working on his fishing boat trying to make enough money to feed his family despite the rationing and the shortages and the slow starvation of the war economy. The bomb that hit the harbor was a 500-pounder. It vaporized Takeshi and 17 other fishermen. Their bodies were never recovered. There was nothing left to bury. Chio fled north with her 2 children. Daichi, 6 years old, serious boy with his father's eyes. Hanako, 4, still young enough that she did not fully understand why Papa was not coming home, why they lived in caves now, why Mama cried at night when she thought they were sleeping. For weeks they hid, ate grass and tree bark, drank rainwater collected in leaves. Chio's body began to consume itself. Her ribs showed through her skin. Her children grew hollow-eyed and listless, and every day Japanese soldiers came through the caves repeating the same warnings. The Americans are coming. They eat children. They torture women. They are demons wearing human skin. If they capture you, death will be mercy compared to what they will do. Chio did not want to believe it, but she had lost everything. Her home, her husband, her old life. The world she knew had been burned away, and in its place was only fear and hunger and the desperate struggle to keep her children alive one more day. In grief, desperate people believe desperate things. So when a Japanese sergeant came through the cave and handed her a grenade, she took it. "For your children," he said. "When the Americans come, make it quick. Do not let them suffer." She looked at the grenade in her hand. Type 97. The same model that had killed her neighbor and her neighbor's 3 children when the woman pulled the pin in a moment of terror and panic. Chio loved her children more than life itself, would die 1,000 deaths to spare them a single moment of pain. And that is exactly why the propaganda worked, because it weaponized love, turned the most powerful human emotion into a tool of self-destruction. Corporal Benjamin Hayes had been in the Pacific for 18 months. He had seen things that would stay with him forever, had saved 73 men and lost 29, and remembered every single name. From Boston, 2 years into Harvard Medical School when Pearl Harbor happened. 25 years old and engaged to Margaret O'Connor, a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital. The plan had been simple: finish school, get married, open a practice in Brookline, raise a family, live a good, quiet, meaningful life. Then the world caught fire. Ben enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. Margaret begged him not to. "We need doctors at home," she said. "You can serve here. You do not have to go fight." Ben kissed her forehead, held her while she cried. "If I do not go, men will die who I could have saved. I cannot live with that." By April 1945, Ben had survived Leyte, survived Luzon, survived battles whose names he tried to forget, but whose details haunted his dreams. He did not carry a rifle anymore, just his medical bag and morphine syrettes, and the desperate hope that he could save more than he lost. And after Saipan, after hearing stories from Marines about civilians killing themselves, Ben started carrying something else. Photographs. Pictures of Margaret smiling in her nurse's uniform. His family gathered around the Christmas tree. Boston Common in autumn, the leaves gold and red, the swan boats on the pond. Because he had learned something the hard way. When people are brainwashed, you cannot logic them out of it. You cannot explain away months or years of propaganda with words. You have to show them you are human first. April 19th, 1945. Hills south of Shuri Castle. Ben's unit, the 77th Infantry Division, had cornered a large group in a burial tomb, a traditional Okinawan haka carved into the limestone hillside. These tombs were sacred spaces, places where families laid their ancestors to rest, places of peace. Now they had become prisons, traps, mass graves waiting to happen. Lieutenant Miller, Ben's commanding officer, tried the Saipan playbook. He ordered the unit to pull back 20 yards, had men place crates of sea rations and jerry cans of water at the cave entrance, visible, accessible, proof of good intentions. Then Tommy Chen, the same Nisei interpreter from Saipan, now attached to the 77th, raised his bullhorn. "We are not here to harm you. We have medical care, food for your children, water, safety. Please come out. You will not be hurt." From inside the tomb, a voice echoed back. Hard, fanatical, uncompromising. "Lies, American lies. We die together with honor. We die for the Emperor." And then they heard it. The unmistakable hiss of a demolition fuse. The sergeant inside was going to blow the cave, with everyone inside, soldiers and civilians together, men, women, children, all of them. Ben's stomach dropped. His mouth went dry. How long, he shouted to the engineer crouched beside him. The engineer listened, cocked his head, calculating based on the sound. 6 minutes, maybe 7. Inside the tomb, Chio Miyazaki heard the fuse, smelled the burning powder. The air was already foul thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and fear and desperation. Now it filled with the acrid chemical smell of explosives ready to detonate. Sergeant Kojima stood over the crate of demolitions, skull-faced, fanatic-eyed. His rifle was slung across his back, but his hand rested on the grip of his Nambu pistol, ready to shoot anyone who tried to stop him. "No one leaves," he said. His voice was calm, almost serene, the voice of a true believer who had found peace in the certainty of death. "We die for the Emperor. We die with dignity. This is the only honor left to us." Chio looked at Daichi and Hanako. 6 years old, 4 years old, her entire world, her reason for living. Was this really honor killing children because of what might happen? For the first time, a thought crept into her mind like a thief in the night. What if it was another lie? She had never actually seen what Americans did to prisoners. She had only been told, by soldiers, by officers, by radio broadcasts. But had anyone she knew, anyone she trusted, actually witnessed these atrocities? Or was it like the stories of demons and ghosts that adults told children to keep them obedient? The fuse continued to hiss. 5 minutes left, maybe less. An old man near the cave entrance stood up. Mr. Nakamura, 72 years old, farmer, grandfather of 8. He had survived the annexation of Okinawa, the transformation from independent kingdom to Japanese prefecture. He had seen governments come and go. He knew that empires were temporary, but family was eternal. Kojima screamed at him, "Sit down, old man. To leave is to betray the Emperor." Mr. Nakamura looked at him. His face was weathered, lined with decades of sun and salt and hard labor. His eyes were tired, but clear. "The Emperor is in Tokyo," he said. His voice was raspy but firm. "My grandchildren are starving here. What does he know about honor?" He began to walk toward the light. Kojima's hand moved to his pistol. Outside, Ben Hayes saw the old man emerge, saw the rifle barrel behind him, saw death about to happen. Ben ran. No weapon, no helmet, just his medical bag slapping against his hip. He ran across the open ground between the American line and the cave entrance, ran toward the old man who was about to be shot. Kojima raised his pistol. Ben did not look back, did not flinch. He focused entirely on the old man, reached him, put himself between the old man and the gun, met the old man's eyes, smiled. Then Ben pulled out his canteen, unscrewed the cap, offered it. The old man drank. Long pulls. Water ran down his chin. His eyes closed in relief. Ben pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lit one with his Zippo. The flame flickered in the wind. He handed the cigarette to the old man. And then Ben did something that would save 200 lives. He pulled out his photograph of Margaret. The one where she is smiling in her white nurse's uniform, standing in front of Mass General, the Boston skyline behind her. He held it out so the old man could see, Family Ben said, pointed to Margaret, then pointed to himself. My family. The old man stared at the photograph. His eyes widened. He looked from the picture to Ben's face. Understanding dawned. This American soldier has a woman waiting for him. He has love. He has loss. He has something to go home to. He is not a monster. He is a man. The old man turned back toward the cave, shouted in Japanese. He has a family. He is just a man. They are not devils. 4 minutes left on the fuse. Inside the tomb, Chiyo heard those words. She looked at her children, at Daichi's serious face, at Hanako's innocent eyes. She made a choice. She stood up, took Daichi's hand, picked up Hanako, started walking toward the light. Kojima swung his rifle toward her. 2 young Okinawan men, brothers farmers conscripted into labor battalions, tackled him. The 3 men went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. A struggle, grunting, the sound of fists on flesh. A single gunshot, deafening in the enclosed space. Kojima went limp. One of the brothers grabbed the fuse, pressed it against the damp stone floor, ground it out with his bare hand, the burning powder searing his palm. The hissing stopped. Silence. Then a collective exhalation. 200 people releasing breath they did not know they were holding. The sound of relief so profound it was almost a moan. The spell was broken. Slowly, like ghosts emerging from the underworld, people began to move toward the light. Hesitant, blinking, barely able to believe they were choosing life. Chiyo Miyazaki, holding her children's hands so tightly her knuckles were white, walked out of the tomb. The daylight hit her like a physical blow, painfully bright after days in the darkness. She blinked, squinted, and saw them. Young men, boys really, their faces caked in mud, their uniforms torn and stained. They looked exhausted, haggard, human, and they were smiling. The next morning, the 77th Infantry Division set up a field kitchen near the cave entrance. The smell hit Chiyo before she saw the sauce. Rich, salty, fatty. Her stomach cramped so violently she almost doubled over. Bacon. Real American bacon cooked crispy in mess kits over portable stoves. The Marines had brought up supplies from the beach, fresh rations, real food. Not the mouldy rice and weevil-infested grain that had been their diet for weeks. Ben Hayes personally walked over to where Chiyo sat with her children. He gestured toward the makeshift tables, smiled, pointed to his mouth, eating, the universal gesture. Daichi held his mother's hand so tight it hurt. His eyes were wide, locked on the strange American soldier with the gentle face. Hanako hid behind her mother's legs, peeking out occasionally with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Chiyo hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger. The propaganda warnings echoed in her skull. This is the trap. This is how they lure you. The food is poisoned. The kindness is a lie designed to make you lower your guard before the real horror begins. But her children were starving. She could count every rib on Daichi's chest. Hanako's arms were like twigs. They had not had protein in weeks. Their bodies were consuming themselves. Private First Class Bobby Walsh. The same kid from Saipan now, with his arm in a sling from the shoulder wound that had nearly killed him, walked over. He had been transferred to the 77th after recovering. When he heard about the cave rescue, he had volunteered to help with the civilians. Bobby remembered the chocolate moment. It haunted him. The little girl's laugh, the mother's tears. He had carried that memory through surgery, through infection, through the long nights when the pain made sleep impossible. That memory reminded him why he was here, what he was fighting for. Not to kill, to save. Bobby picked up a piece of bacon from the mess kit, held it up so Chio could see clearly. Then he ate it, made an exaggerated show of chewing, swallowing. He patted his stomach, smiled, made a satisfied sound. Then he held out another piece to Daichi. Chio started to pull her son back. The instinct was automatic. Protect the child. Trust no one. Survival means suspicion. But Daichi was 6 years old, and he was so hungry his hands shook. He could smell the bacon. His mouth watered. His body overrode his fear. He reached out, took the bacon, bit into it. His face transformed. He had never tasted anything like it. The salt exploded on his tongue. The fat melted in his mouth. The smoky richness was like a revelation. Food could taste like this. Food could be this good. Daichi looked up at Bobby and smiled. A real, genuine, unguarded smile. The first smile he had smiled since his father died. Bobby ruffled his hair. The gesture was so natural, so brotherly, so completely at odds with the monster the propaganda had promised. Chio Miyazaki began to cry. Not from sadness, not from fear, from relief so overwhelming it felt like drowning. She had been ready to kill her children with a grenade to spare them torture. She had believed death was mercy. Instead, they were eating bacon with enemy soldiers who treated them like guests, like humans, like people worthy of kindness. The cognitive dissonance was so complete, so total that her mind could not process it. All she could do was weep. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Years of propaganda, months of terror, weeks of starvation, all of it crashing down at once in the face of simple human decency. Ben knelt beside her, did not touch her, did not invade her space, just knelt there, present, patient, waiting for the storm to pass. When Chio finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen, Ben pulled out his photograph, the one of Margaret. He showed it to her, pointed to the image, then to himself. Wife, he said, knowing she would not understand the word, but hoping she would understand the meaning. Family, love, home. Chio stared at the photograph. This American soldier had a woman waiting for him, had love, had a life he wanted to return to. He was not a monster. He was a man far from home who missed someone, just like her husband had been, just like Takeshi, who died in the harbor bombing, who left her alone with 2 children and no future. The Americans were not so different. They loved, they mourned, they hoped. The lie had been so complete that recognizing the truth felt like being born again. Painful, disorienting, necessary. 3 days later, Private First Class Danny Reeves arrived at the 77th Infantry Division's prisoner processing area. He had been transferred from Saipan operations, still carried Michael's letter in his breast pocket, still thought about the civilians who jumped. Those memories would never leave him. He walked through the compound. saw Okinawan refugees sitting in organized groups, children playing simple games with pebbles and sticks, women talking with American soldiers through interpreters. The scene was surreal, peaceful, almost normal. And then he saw her. Keiko Yamada, the nurse from behind the volcanic rock, the woman he had given water to on the plateau at Marpi Point 9 months ago. Their eyes met across 30 feet of open ground. Keiko recognized the blue eyes first, then the tall frame, the broad shoulders, the face that had appeared in her nightmares and her prayers in equal measure, the Marine who gave her water, who saved her life, who proved the propaganda was a lie. Danny recognized the terrified face that had become tears, the nurse who thought he was a demon, who learned he was just tired. Neither moved. The weight of that moment on Saipan hung between them like something physical. Tommy Chen noticed. He had been working as a translator in the camp, helping refugees communicate with their American captors who were trying very hard not to be captors, trying to be protectors instead. Tommy walked over to Keiko, spoke to her in Japanese, asked if she wanted to talk to the Marine who saved her. Keiko nodded, could not speak. Her throat was too tight. Tommy waved Danny over. The three of them stood in awkward silence, the space between them filled with unspoken memories, unspoken trauma, unspoken gratitude. Then Keiko spoke. Her voice was soft, halting. Tommy translated. "You gave me water. You gave me my life. I do not know how to thank you." Danny shifted his weight, uncomfortable with gratitude, uncomfortable with being seen as a hero when he had just done what felt right in the moment. "Ma'am, I just could not let you die. That ain't what we do." Keiko's next question cut to the heart of everything. "But your country sent you to kill us." Danny was quiet for a moment, thinking, choosing his words carefully. To kill soldiers, not civilians, never civilians. There is a difference. Keiko absorbed this. The distinction the propaganda had never made, the line between combatant and innocent that her own army had erased but the Americans tried to preserve. Tommy added something Keiko had said. She wants to know if she can help. She is a nurse, a good one. She wants to make up for the lives lost. Danny looked at Keiko, saw the guilt written on her face, the desperate need for purpose, for redemption, for a way to transform her survival into something meaningful. "We need medical staff. Tell her she can save lives now. Make up for the ones who did not make it." When Tommy translated, Keiko's face broke into a smile. The first real smile since before the war. Redemption, purpose, a future. Across the compound, Bobby Walsh was teaching Daichi how to play catch. A baseball, a glove borrowed from another Marine who was happy to loan it for this purpose. "Okay, kid, just throw it here, right to my glove." Bobby held up his left hand. The glove was comically oversized on Daichi's small frame. The ball was regulation size, too big for a 6-year-old's hand. Daichi wound up, threw, wild. The ball sailed 3 feet to the left. Bobby lunged, caught it anyway. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. Good. That was good. Try again. Daichi threw again. Better this time. Closer to the target. Bobby caught it, grinned, gave him a thumbs up. Again. They fell into a rhythm. Throw, catch, throw, catch. The simple repetition of a game older than the war, older than the hatred. A game that required nothing but a ball and 2 people willing to play. Daichi laughed. The sound was pure and bright, a child's laugh that rang across the compound like a bell announcing that joy was still possible even here, even now, even after everything. Chio watched from a distance. Her son, who watched his father die, who lived in caves eating grass, who came within minutes of being blown apart by his own army, was laughing, playing a game, with people who were supposed to be monsters. No, not monsters, just people. That baseball would change Daichi's life in ways Chio could not imagine. 30 years later, he would return to America, not as a refugee, not as a former enemy, but as a diplomat, a bridge between two nations that had tried to destroy each other and somehow found a way back to peace. And it would all trace back to this moment. Bobby Walsh teaching him to play catch, showing him that Americans were not demons, but people who played games and laughed and shared what they had. That evening, a Japanese officer stumbled into the compound, barely conscious, wounded, delirious. His uniform was torn and filthy. Blood seeped through a makeshift bandage on his side. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura. He had survived Saipan, survived the massacre at Marpi Point, survived 9 months of hiding in caves, eating roots and insects, drinking rainwater, slowly dying of infections and starvation and the crushing weight of guilt. Tommy Chen recognized him immediately. They had crossed paths during the bullhorn attempts at Marpi Point. Tommy never forgot a face. Medics rushed over, Ben Hayes among them. They carried Nakamura to the medical tent, laid him on a cot. Ben cut away the filthy bandage. The wound beneath was infected, red streaks of sepsis radiating out from the entry point. Another day or two, and Nakamura would have died. Keiko was there too, working as a medical assistant. When she saw Nakamura's face, she gasped. She knew him. He had been stationed at Saipan. A junior officer, thoughtful, educated, not like the fanatics. Ben worked quickly, cleaned the wound, debrided the infected tissue. Nakamura woke up screaming. Ben held him down gently but firmly while Keiko spoke to him in Japanese. Soothing words, reassuring words. You are safe. We are helping you. The pain will pass. When the worst was over, when the wound was stitched and bandaged properly, Nakamura lay back and stared at the canvas ceiling of the medical tent. Tears ran down his temples into his hair. You should kill me, he said in English. His accent was good, educated. He had studied at the University of Michigan before the war, had American friends, had loved American jazz and American movies and American optimism. I am the enemy. I watched my officers murder our people at Saipan. I did nothing. I should die for my cowardice. Ben did not look up from organizing his medical supplies. His hands were steady, professional. I am a medic. I do not kill. I fix. But I deserve death. Maybe. But that is not my decision to make. My job is to keep you alive. What you do with that life is up to you. Tommy Chen, translating nearby, suggested something. Lieutenant, hundreds of Japanese are still hiding in caves, still believing the propaganda, still choosing death over surrender. If you make a radio broadcast, tell them the truth about how Americans treat prisoners, you could save thousands. Nakamura closed his eyes. The weight of the decision crushed down on him like a physical force. To do this would be to admit everything, to confess his survival, to collaborate with the enemy, to destroy whatever shred of honor he had left in the eyes of his countrymen. But what was honor worth if it was built on lies? He thought of his sister. She had been at Marpi Point. She jumped, died believing Americans were demons, died because he was too afraid to tell her the truth. I will do it, he said, for my sister, for all those who died believing lies. I will tell the truth. The first broadcast went out at dawn. Nakamura sat in a tent with a microphone and a Japanese-American technician who looked at him with something between pity and respect. His hands shook as he read the script he had written himself. This is Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura. I am alive. I am being treated with dignity. His voice cracked. He stopped, started again. My sister died at Marpi Point believing the lies. I survived believing the same lies. But I have seen the truth. The Americans are not devils. They are men, tired, scared men who chose to save us when they could have destroyed us." He paused, looked at the American technician. "Surrender is not dishonor. It is choosing life. Your families need you alive." 3 days later, a Japanese soldier walked out of a cave. He was 42, a sergeant from Kyoto. He carried a white cloth tied to a stick. When the Americans brought him to the processing area, he asked to speak to Lieutenant Nakamura. They met in the medical tent. The sergeant bowed deeply. "I heard your broadcast, Lieutenant. I have 3 children in Kyoto. Because of your words, they will have a father." Nakamura wept. For the first time since his sister died, he wept. Not from grief, from relief. He had saved someone. It did not bring his sister back. It did not erase his cowardice at Marpy Point. But it was something. A small redemption. A beginning. Over the next week, Nakamura recorded more broadcasts. They were played on loudspeakers near cave networks throughout southern Okinawa. His voice, calm and clear, spoke words that shattered the propaganda. The results were extraordinary. In 10 days, 2,247 Japanese soldiers and civilians surrendered because of Nakamura's broadcasts. 2,000 lives saved by one man's willingness to speak truth. The propaganda had said Americans were devils. Nakamura's testimony proved they were men, flawed men, tired men, men capable of cruelty like all men, but also men capable of mercy, of compassion, of choosing to save rather than destroy. That was the secret weapon Japan feared most. Not the bombs, not the industrial might, not the endless resources. The thing they feared was the possibility that American values, the real ones, not the twisted propaganda versions, were actually worth believing in. Because once you experienced them, once you tasted that bacon, or caught that baseball, or received that medical care, you could not go back to the lies. The truth became undeniable. May 15th, 1945, 3 weeks after the cave rescue. Corporal Bobby Walsh stood at the compound fence watching Daichi practice his throwing motion. The kid had gotten good, really good. His throws were straighter now, faster. He was starting to understand the mechanics. Bobby's shoulder still ached, probably always would, but watching that kid laugh made it worth it. A jeep pulled up. Danny Reeves stepped out, duffel bag over his shoulder. He was shipping out. Back to the States. The war was ending. They were sending men home in waves now. Danny walked over to where Keiko was working in the medical tent. She looked up. Their eyes met one last time. "Thank you," she said in careful English. She had been practicing. Danny nodded. Words felt insufficient. "I will become doctor." Keiko continued. "In America, I will help people, like you helped me." And she did. In 1948, Dr. Keiko Yamada arrived at Harvard Medical School under a reconciliation program. She graduated in 1952, opened a clinic in Los Angeles in 1955, treated over 15,000 patients in her career. She kept a canteen on her desk for 73 years. Danny Reeves's canteen, the one he gave Fumiko that day on Marpy Point. Fumiko had given it to Keiko before dying of tuberculosis in 1947, saying, "This is the canteen that saved us. Keep it. Remember." When Dr. Yamada died in 2018 at age 97, she donated the canteen to the Smithsonian. It sits now in the National Museum of American History, a small metal cylinder that destroyed a nation's propaganda. Daiichi Miyazaki did become a diplomat. In 1975, age 36, he was assigned to Washington, D.C. His first act was tracking down Bobby Walsh. Bobby was 48, managing a hardware store in Des Moines, never married, never forgot the war. When Daiichi showed up at his door, Bobby did not recognize him at first. Then Daichi held up a baseball. "You taught me to catch, Mr. Walsh." I never forgot. They embraced. Two men separated by war, reunited by a memory of kindness. The photo of their reunion appeared in the Des Moines Register. The headline read, "Baseball Diplomacy War Orphan Returns to Thank American Soldier." Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura never returned to Japan. He could not face his family after surviving when his sister died. He applied for U.S. citizenship in 1950, became Henry Nakamura American citizen in 1952. He worked as a translator at the Japanese consulate in San Francisco, married a Nisei woman named Grace in 1954, had 2 children, lived quietly carrying the weight of what he witnessed and what he failed to prevent. In 1977, his niece wrote to him from Tokyo. She had learned he survived, wanted to meet him, told him, "My mother said you were brave for telling the truth. Come home." Henry Nakamura returned to Japan for the first time in 32 years. His niece met him at the airport with flowers. She said, "Welcome home, uncle. You have been away too long." He replied, "I thought I was a coward. You were the bravest. You chose truth over honor. That is harder." Henry Nakamura died in 1999, age 84. At his funeral in San Francisco, both American and Japanese flags flew. Danny Reeves attended. So did Tommy Chen. So did Daichi Miyazaki. 3 old men from 3 different worlds mourning a 4th, all connected by a single truth. Kindness destroys lies better than any weapon ever could. The numbers tell the story. Saipan, July 1944. 8,000 Japanese civilians died by suicide or murder by their own forces. 1,000 were saved by American intervention. Survival rate 11%. Okinawa, April through June 1945. 150,000 total civilian casualties. But because of lessons learned at Saipan, better tactics, Nisei interpreters, officers like Nakamura, speaking truth, approximately 50,000 surrendered and survived who otherwise would have died. Without Saipan's lessons, Okinawa's civilian death toll could have exceeded 200,000. Propaganda killed more Japanese civilians than American bombs. The lie was deadlier than the war. Today we call it information warfare, narrative control, psychological operations. But it is the same thing. Convincing people that surrender equals horror, that the enemy is subhuman, that dying is better than living under their control, and it still works. In places we do not talk about enough, in conflicts we would rather forget. But here is what Saipan and Okinawa taught us. Truth delivered with compassion destroys fear. Not speeches, not propaganda campaigns. Actions. A canteen of water, a piece of chocolate, a baseball glove. These were not grand gestures. They were human ones, and they saved thousands. If you agree that these values are worth preserving, share this story. If you have family stories of American service members showing humanity in impossible situations, tell them in the comments. And if you believe that truth is stronger than propaganda, that compassion is more powerful than hatred, that the real measure of a nation is how it treats even its enemies, then subscribe. Because this story is not over. It is still being written. Every time we choose truth over lies, compassion over hate, humanity over propaganda. That is when we honor the Danny Reeves, the Keiko Yamadas, the Chio Miyazakis, the Henry Nakamuras of the world, not by remembering war, but by remembering what we fought for.